wanted to have. He outlines the state's case against Caylee, touching on her many lies to her parents and others, the smell in the car's trunk, identified by several witnesses, including her own father as an odor for human decomposition, and the items found in Caylee's skeletal remains in December 2008. He emphasized how Caylee maintains her lies until they absolutely cannot be maintained anymore, and then replaces them with another lie, including Zanny the nanny, for example. Anthony repeatedly told police that Caylee was with the nanny when Caylee was with the nanny was specifically identified as Zadaya Fernandez Gonzalez. Police, however, were never able to find any nanny. The authorities did find a woman named Zadaya Fernandez Gonzalez, but she died ever meeting the Anthonys. As to reintroduce items found in Caylee's remains, including a Winnie the Pooh blanket that matched the bedding in her grandparents' home, one set of laundry bags with twin bags found at the Anthony home, and tuck tape he said was relatively rare bag. That bag is Caylee's coffin. Ashton said, holding up a photograph of the laundry bag, as Caylee reacted with emotion. He further criticized the defense theory that Caylee drowned in the Anthony pool and Caylee and George panicked upon finding the child's body and covered up her death. He advised jurors to use their common sense when deciding on the verdict. No one makes an accident look like a murder.
So what's the evidence, I guess, at this point that it is a murder instead of an accident?
The duct tape.
Yeah, but earlier in
the bag.
I understand, but earlier they had mentioned that the family had buried pets in a bag and used duct tape to seal off the bag before they buried them. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And there's no clear evidence to say that chloroform was used.
Right.
Am I grabbing at things here?
No. You're exactly pointing out the prosecution's evidence. They don't got much.
They don't got much to call it a murder.
You call it a murder. You have a lot of circumstantial evidence. You can't win a case on circumstantial evidence.
All right. So,
before closing arguments, Judge Perry ruled the defense could argue that a drowning occurred due to reasonable conclusions aided by witness testimony, but that arguing sexual abuse was not allowed since there was nothing to support the claim that George sexually abused Caylee. Bias began by contending that there were holes in the prosecution's forensic evidence, saying it is based on fantasy. He told the jury that the prosecution wanted them to see stains in insects that did not really exist, that they had not proven that the stains in Anthony's car trunk were caused by Caylee's decomposing body, rather than a bag of trash found there. He added that the prosecution tried to make his client look like a promiscuous liar because their evidence was weak. He said that the drowning is the only explanation that makes sense. It showed jurors a photograph of Caylee opening the home's sliding glass door by herself. He stressed that there was no child safety locks in the home and that both of Casey's parents, George and Cindy, testified that Caylee could get out of the house easily. Although Cindy testified that Caylee could not put the ladder on the side of the pool and climb up. Baez alleged that Cindy may have left the ladder up the night before. She didn't admit to doing so in testimony, he said, but how much guilt would she have known it was her that left the ladder up that day? Defense attorney Jose Baez told jurors his biggest fear that they would base their verdict on emotions, not evidence. The strategy behind that is, if you hate her, if you think she's lying, no good slut, then you'll start to look at the evidence in a different light. He said, I told you at the very beginning of this case this is an accident that snowballed out of control, that it was unique. What made it unique is not what happened, but who it happened to. He explained Casey Anson's behavior as a result of a dysfunctional family situation. At one point, as Baez spoke up, Ash could be seen smiling or chuckling behind his hands. This prompted Baez to refer to him as this laughing guy here. The judge called the sidebar conference in recess. When court resumed, he chastised both sides, saying that both Ashton and Baez had violated his order that neither side could make disparaging remarks about opposing counsel. After both attorneys apologized, the judge accepted apologies but warned that recurrence would have the offending attorneys exclude them from the courtroom. Defense attorney Channy Mason then followed with an additional closing statement, addressing the jury to discuss the charges against Casey Anthony. The burden rests on the shoulders of my colleagues at the state attorney's office, Mason said, referring to providing that Casey Anthony committed a crime. Mason said the jurors are required, whether they like it or not, to find the defendant not guilty. The state did not adequately prove its case against Casey Anthony. Mason emphasized that the burden of proof is on the state and that Casey Anthony's decision not to testify is not an implication of guilt. Lead prosecutor Linda Dane Burke, in the prosecution's rebuttal, told jurors that she and her colleagues backed up every claim they made in their opening statement 6 weeks ago and implied that the defense never directly backed up their own opening statement claims. My biggest fear is that common sense will be lost in all the rhetoric of the case, she said, insisting that she would never ask the jury to make a decision based on emotions, but rather the evidence. Responses to guilt are so predictable, she stated. What do guilty people do? They lie. They avoid. They run. They mislead. They divert attention away from themselves and act like nothing is wrong. She suggested that the garbage in the trunk of the car was a decoy, put there by people from getting suspicious about the smell of the car, which she had left it abandoned in a parking lot stall directly beside a dumpster in an Amscott parking lot. Whose life was better without Casey, she asked, stressing how George and Cindy were wondering where their daughter and granddaughter were in June and July 2008. At the same time, Casey was staying at her boyfriend's apartment while Caylee's body was decomposing in the woods. That's the only question that you need to answer in concerning why Caylee Marie Anthony was left on the side of a road dead. Burlick then showed the jury a split screen photo with Casey partying in a nightclub on one side and a close-up of Mia Vella being Beautiful Life tattooed she got in the weeks after Casey died on the other. The jury began deliberation on July 4th. On July 5th, the prosecutors stated that during the deliberations, they were about to give the jury the correct information in regards to Bradley's software discrepancies. However, the jury reached a verdict before they do so. One legal analysis stated that the jury had found Casey guilty before receiving the exculpatory evidence. The prosecution's failure to fully disclose it would have been grounds for mistrial. Mm-hmm. So here we go with the verdict. On July 5th, 2011, the jury found Casey Anthony not guilty of counts 1 through 3 regarding first-degree murder, aggravated manslaughter of a child, and aggravated child abuse, while finding her guilty on counts 4 through 7 for providing false information to law enforcement. Count 4. Anthony said she was employed at Universal Studios in 2008, pertinent to the investigation of the missing persons report. Count 5. Anthony said she left Casey in an apartment complex with a babysitter, calling law enforcement to pursue the missing babysitter. Count 6. Anthony said she informed 2 employees of Universal Studios, Jeff Hopkins and Juliette Lewis, at Universal of the disappearance of Caylee. Count 7. Anthony said she had received a phone call and spoke to Caylee on July 15, 2008, causing law enforcement to expand further resources. And about count 6, Juliette Lewis is not a real person.
Makes sense.
On July 7, 2011, sentencing arguments were heard. She was sentenced to 4 years in prison for every count and $1,000 fines for each of the preceding counts. She received credit for the 1,043 days she had spent in jail plus good behavior, resulting in her release on July 17, 2011. Anthony then filed a notice of appeal on July 5th, 2011. In September 2011, Perry complied with the Florida statute regarding judges to assess investigative and prosecution counts if requested by state agency, ruled that Casey Anthony must pay $217,000 to the state of Florida. He ruled she had to pay those costs directly, lying to law enforcement about the death of Caylee, including search costs only up to September 30th, 2008, when the sheriff's office stopped investigating a missing child case. In the earlier arguments, Mason had called the prosecution's attempt to exact the larger sum sour grapes because the prosecution lost its case. He told reporters that Anthony is negligent. In January 2013, the Florida Appeals Court reduced her convictions from 4 to 2. Her attorney had argued that her false statements constituted a single offense. However, the appeals court noted she gave false information during 2 separate police interviews several hours apart.
So that's the case. The rest of what we can talk about is sort of the media coverage and the aftermath and things like that. Just, as far as a comment or two to make about the case itself. Reading through the evidence, reading through what the prosecution came up with, reading through what the jurors had sort of to go to base their decision on. There isn't enough evidence to suggest that there was a murder that took place.
It was shitty ass evidence. I mean, as much as people they want to be angry about this, be angry at the prosecution. They brought a shitty ass fucking case. You didn't do the due diligence on this case. This was shitty. You have no murder weapon. You bungled up your internet searches, which we'll get into the end when I tell you what I think it happened. You did fucked up.
My question, although, is that even if she wasn't charged with murder, how come nobody's being charged with a count of like a cover-up? Because if the child actually died in the pool and they buried the body, isn't that a crime? To not report the missing?
But the only person they can charge is Casey. They can't charge George and Cindy because they were witnesses for the prosecution and they thought they couldn't get a case.
Why did they charge Casey then?
They did charge Casey.
Not with that. Look, the counts that they charged her had nothing to do with the kid.
Oh, they didn't find the body. They didn't find the body till later, and they decided that this was going to be the charges they had were enough to get the death penalty. So they weren't thinking about charges later because now it goes into double jeopardy. You charge her afterwards, he's acquitted. It's double jeopardy. Case thrown out.
It still doesn't. I don't understand how a kid went missing and then her remains were found. Who's being charged for that crime?
They charged Casey with it.
But now with that crime.
Specifically, that crime, they charged him with first degree murder and child neglect and aggravated manslaughter.
Which she was found not guilty.
She was found not guilty. The prosecution put all their eggs into that basket.
I see.
That's it.
I see. Because they didn't charge her with the crime of
concealment. They were just because
they couldn't go for both at the same time. I see.
They figured that this was enough. They had enough evidence to be able to prosecute and get the death penalty for that. But they lost the case.
Interesting.
Let's go through quickly the media coverage. It was comparable to the O.J. Simpson trial. Both widespread media coverage and this was shocking the not guilty verdict. It was covered through daily talk shows, including Greta Van Sutton, Nancy Grace, Gerardo Rivera. Was also featured on America's Most Wanted, Dateline, 2020. Casey Anthony's parents, Cindy and George, appeared on the Today Show. They maintained the belief that Caylee was alive and well when they went on the Today Show in October 2008. More than 6,000 pages of evidence released by the Orange County Sheriff's Department includes hundreds of instant messages between Casey and her ex-boyfriend Tony Rizzoli, which were subject to increased scrutiny by the media for clues and possible motives for homicide. Outside of the Anthony home, reporters were out there every day, and protesters were constantly showing up shouting "baby killer," and George Anthony was also physically attacked. George Anthony was reported missing on